I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never hurt my son Paw.
A respected lawyer, a prominent family, and a double murder that left an entire community reeling in disbelief. Alex Murdaugh wasn't just another attorney. He was the latest heir to a century-old legacy of power and privilege in the South Carolina Lowcountry. His family's name was etched into the region's history books, their influence felt in courtrooms and back rooms alike. But behind the grand estates and polished facades lurked a darkness no one could have imagined. On a seemingly ordinary summer night, tragedy struck the Murdaugh family's sprawling estate. A frantic 911 call shattered the silence.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
When police arrived, they uncovered a scene so horrifying it would haunt even seasoned investigators. Maggie Murdaugh and her youngest son, Paul, were found brutally murdered, their lives stolen in a violent act that defied explanation. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a story of tragedy. It was a story of secrets. Beneath Alex Murdaugh's polished exterior lay a web of lies, theft, and deceit so tangled it would ultimately unravel the powerful dynasty his family had built over generations. What could drive a man to betray not only his community, but his own flesh and blood? How could someone who seemed to have everything, wealth, status, a loving family, become capable of such monstrous acts? This is the story of betrayal, greed, and bloodshed. A chilling tale of a man who went to unthinkable lengths to protect his dark secrets. Stay with us as we uncover the twisted truth behind the Murdaugh murders, peeling back the layers of a case that shocked the nation and left a once revered name in ruins. This is a story you won't want to miss. The Murdaugh family had been a pillar of the South Carolina Lowcountry for over a century. Their name carried weight, their influence unquestionable, their legacy deeply entwined with the very fabric of the region. For 3 generations, the Murdaughs held the position of solicitor, essentially the district attorney, over a sprawling 5-county area. They prosecuted crimes, shaped laws, and wielded power in ways most families could only dream of. To many in Hampton County, the Murdaughs were more than just lawyers. They were the law. At the heart of this dynasty was Alex Murdaugh. With his charming southern drawl, sharp legal mind, and deep ties to the community, Alex seemed destined to continue his family's legacy of power and prestige. He lived with his wife, Maggie, and their 2 sons, Buster and Paul, on a massive 1,700-acre estate called Moselle. It was a place that seemed to symbolize everything the Murdaughs represented: wealth, privilege, and an unshakable connection to the land they ruled over. But behind the gates of Moselle and the polished reputation of the Murdaugh name, cracks were beginning to form. Alex wasn't just a lawyer. He was a man burdened by secrets, deceit, and a mounting web of lies. For years, those cracks were easy to overlook, hidden behind the Murdaugh's powerful facade. But by 2021, the cracks had widened into fissures too large to ignore. On the night of June 7, 2021, a frantic 911 call shattered the quiet of Moselle. Alex Murdaugh, his voice trembling and broken, told the dispatcher that he had discovered the bodies of his wife Maggie and son Paul. They were dead, he said, shot near the kennels on their estate. The scene described to authorities was one of unspeakable horror. Paul, just 22 years old, had been shot twice with a shotgun, once in the chest and once in the head. Maggie, 52, had been shot multiple times with a high-powered rifle, her body lying several yards away from her son's. The news of the double murder sent shockwaves through the small, tight-knit community. How could such a horrific act happen to a family as powerful and respected as the Murdaughs? Rumors swirled, speculation ran rampant, and the small town was gripped with fear. But as investigators began to piece together the events of that fateful night, the story of the Murdaughs started to unravel in ways no one could have anticipated. At first, Alex Murdaugh portrayed himself as a grieving husband and father, devastated by the loss of his wife and son. He appeared on local news, his face pale and tear-streaked, pleading for answers. "Whoever did this," he said in one interview, "they need to be found. They need to be brought to justice." His cries for help seemed genuine, his pain palpable. But there were whispers, subtle at first, then louder, about whether Alex's grief was as real as it seemed. Paul Murdaugh, the younger of Alex's two sons, had been a source of controversy long before his death. At the time of the murders, Paul was facing felony charges for his role in a 2019 boating accident that had claimed the life of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. Witnesses said Paul had been heavily intoxicated when he crashed the family's boat into a bridge, throwing Mallory and several others into the water. Paul's behavior that night had been described as arrogant, erratic, and entitled, a young man who believed his family name would protect him from the consequences of his actions. The boating accident had cast a long shadow over the Murdaugh family. Mallory Beach's family and friends were vocal in their belief that justice was being delayed, if not outright obstructed, by the Murdaughs' influence. Paul's case dragged on for years, and many in the community whispered that Alex had used his connections to stall proceedings. The tragedy had become a sore point, not just for the Beach family, but for a community increasingly disillusioned with the Murdaughs' unchecked power. Maggie, too, had her struggles. Friends revealed that she had confided in them about growing tensions within her marriage. Some said she felt isolated at Moselle, far from her social circle and the life she had once enjoyed. There were whispers that she was seeking legal advice about the family's finances, which had reportedly become a source of strain. For a family that seemed to have everything, the Murdaughs were far from perfect. As investigators dug deeper into the circumstances surrounding the murders, they began to uncover inconsistencies in Alex's story. He told authorities that he had been visiting his ailing father and mother at the time of the murders, but phone records and surveillance footage suggested otherwise. Evidence placed Alex at Moselle near the time Maggie and Paul were killed. Then came the bombshell, a video found on Paul's phone. Recorded just moments before the murders, the video captured the voices of Maggie, Paul, and, most damningly, Alex near the kennels. This evidence placed Alex at the scene, contradicting his alibi, and casting a dark shadow over his claims of innocence. The cracks in Alex's story were becoming impossible to ignore. But the biggest revelations were yet to come, as investigators uncovered a web of financial crimes that would redefine the case, and the man at its center. The investigation into Alex Murdaugh's involvement in the murders of his wife and son deepened, and with it, so did the complexities of the case. At first, Alex's alibi seemed plausible. He claimed he had been visiting his parents at the time of the murders, tending to his ailing father and checking on his elderly mother. To many, it seemed like a tragic coincidence that the killings occurred while he was away, but investigators were not so easily convinced. As law enforcement combed through evidence, they discovered gaps in Alex's timeline, small discrepancies that, when pieced together, began to unravel his story. Surveillance footage showed his vehicle entering and leaving Moselle at times that didn't align with his claims. Text messages retrieved from Alex's phone added further doubts, painting a picture of a man whose movements were far more suspicious than he let on. But it was a piece of evidence recovered from Paul's phone that would become the cornerstone of the case against Alex. Just minutes before Paul and Maggie were murdered, Paul had recorded a short video near the kennels at Moselle. The content of the video seemed innocent enough, a recording of one of the family's dogs. But what was most chilling wasn't what the video showed, it was what it captured in the background. Paul's video clearly recorded the voices of Maggie and Alex, placing Alex at the scene moments before the killings. Investigators knew what this meant. Despite his claims of being elsewhere, Alex had been at Moselle. When confronted with this evidence, Alex's response raised even more suspicions. He stumbled over his explanations, offering vague, inconsistent answers. Why had he lied about his whereabouts? Why had he insisted he was nowhere near the property when the video proved otherwise? Each question chipped away at the credibility of his story, and with each passing day, the focus of the investigation narrowed further onto him. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something that added a shocking new dimension to the case. Alex's financial dealings were anything but clean. For years, Alex had built a facade of success as a prominent attorney, but behind the scenes, he was drowning in financial ruin. He had embezzled millions of dollars from his law firm and from clients who trusted him, creating a house of cards that was on the verge of collapsing. One of the most egregious examples of his fraud involved the family of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaughs' longtime housekeeper. Gloria had died in a mysterious fall at Moselle in 2018, and Alex had encouraged her sons to file a wrongful death lawsuit against him, promising them the settlement would provide for their family. But Alex never gave them a dime. Instead, he funneled the $4.3 million settlement into his own accounts, leaving Gloria's grieving family betrayed and penniless. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the motive became. Alex was a man under immense pressure. His law firm had begun questioning discrepancies in its accounts, and his thefts were on the verge of being exposed. Maggie and Paul, intentionally or not, had become obstacles in his path. Prosecutors argued that Alex saw the murders as a way to buy time, to create a spectacle that would shift attention away from his crumbling financial empire and onto his family's tragedy. The trial that followed would become one of the most closely watched in modern history. In January 2023, Alex Murdaugh entered the courtroom, no longer the powerful lawyer, but a defendant facing charges of murder. The prosecution was unrelenting. They painted Alex as a man consumed by greed and desperation, someone who saw no other way out of his mounting troubles than to commit the unthinkable. The evidence was overwhelming. The video from Paul's phone was played for the jury, the voices of Maggie and Alex hauntingly clear. Experts testified about the blood spatter found on Alex's clothing, evidence that placed him near the victims at the time of the murders. The defense tried to argue that Alex was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, that someone else had committed the crimes. But the pieces didn't fit. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Gloria Satterfield's family took the stand. Her sons, who had trusted Alex to do right by them after their mother's death, spoke about the betrayal they felt. They described how Alex had looked them in the eye, promising to take care of them, only to steal the money meant for their family. Their testimony wasn't directly tied to the murders, but it painted a damning portrait of a man who would stop at nothing to protect himself, even if it meant exploiting the grief of others. Throughout the trial, Alex's demeanor became a point of contention. On the stand, he wept, pleaded, and insisted on his innocence. But many observers noted that his tears seemed rehearsed, his emotions carefully calculated. Jurors later reported feeling that his behavior lacked sincerity, that his testimony came across as manipulative rather than genuine. The prosecution's closing argument drove home the gravity of the case. They asked the jury to consider the overwhelming evidence, the lies, and the motive. They painted Alex as a man who had spent his life believing he was untouchable, someone who had grown so accustomed to wielding power that he thought he could get away with anything, even murder. As the courtroom held its breath, the jury deliberated. The question before them was monumental. Had Alex Murdaugh truly committed this horrific act, or was he a victim of circumstance? It took them only a few hours to reach their decision, and when the verdict was read, the weight of the truth finally came crashing down. Alex Murdaugh was found guilty, not just of financial crimes, but of the brutal murders of his wife and son. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the weight of their decision was palpable. Everyone present, family members, reporters, and curious onlookers, knew that this verdict would define not only Alex Murdaugh's future, but also the legacy of a once powerful family. As the four-person stood and delivered the words, "Guilty on all counts," a wave of emotion rippled through the room. Gasps echoed from the gallery, followed by hushed whispers. Alex Murdaugh, the man who once wielded influence over an entire region, now sat motionless, staring ahead as if he hadn't truly processed what had just happened. For the jury, the decision had been clear. The evidence was overwhelming, and the timeline of events left no room for doubt. Paul's video had placed Alex at the scene of the murders moments before they occurred, and the blood spatter on his clothing proved he had been in close proximity when the fatal shots were fired. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that had sealed Alex's fate. It was his demeanor, his inconsistencies, and the stark realization that this was a man willing to betray anyone, even those closest to him, to save himself. Outside the courtroom, the reactions were as mixed as they were intense. For Maggie and Paul's remaining family members, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, spoke through tears to reporters. "This verdict doesn't bring Maggie and Paul back. Nothing ever will. But it does give us some peace knowing that the truth is out and justice has been served. We can start to heal now." Not everyone was satisfied. Some members of the community, particularly those who had long been skeptical of the Murdaugh family's unchecked power, saw Alex's downfall as the long overdue reckoning of a dynasty that had wielded too much control for far too long. "It's about time someone held them accountable," one local resident said. This family thought they were above the law, and Alex paid the price for that arrogance. In stark contrast, there were others who still struggled to believe that Alex could commit such a heinous act. Old friends and acquaintances of the family described him as a man devoted to his children and wife, a loving father who had been consumed by tragedy. "I don't understand it," one former colleague said. "It's hard to reconcile the Alex I knew with the man we saw in court." But the verdict was final, and the sentence that followed made it clear that Alex Murdaugh would never walk free again. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. In delivering the sentence, the judge didn't mince words. "Mr. Murdaugh, your actions were not those of a man overtaken by passion. They were calculated, deliberate, and utterly devoid of humanity. You have brought unimaginable pain to those who loved you, and you must now face the consequences." For Alex, the reality of his situation seemed to settle in during the sentencing. Gone was the stoic facade he had maintained throughout much of the trial. Instead, he appeared visibly shaken, his once confident demeanor replaced by an expression of despair. It was as if he finally understood that there would be no escape, no second chance, no way to talk his way out of the consequences of his actions. The community of Hampton County was left grappling with the fallout of a case that had exposed the darkest corners of its most prominent family. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now a symbol of betrayal and corruption. Businesses that had proudly displayed the Murdaugh name quietly removed plaques and photographs, and locals began to distance themselves from the family's tainted legacy. But for many, the most haunting aspect of the case was not the fall of Alex Murdaugh, but the senseless loss of Maggie and Paul. The double murder had torn apart a family and left an indelible scar on those who had known and loved them. Vigils were held in their memory, with candles lit and prayers offered for their souls. At one vigil, a close friend of Maggie's spoke to the crowd. "Maggie was one of the kindest, most giving people I've ever known. She didn't deserve this. None of this should have happened." Paul's friends, too, shared memories of a young man who, despite his flaws, had a bright future ahead of him. "Paul was like a brother to me," one friend said, his voice breaking. "I still can't believe he's gone. He made mistakes, sure, but he didn't deserve to die like this." As time passed, the case of Alex Murdaugh became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of greed. It also sparked a broader conversation about the warning signs of toxic relationships and the lengths people will go to maintain their image. For prosecutors and investigators, the trial was a testament to the importance of holding even the most influential individuals accountable. In the wake of Alex's conviction, the legal system turned its attention to the broader implications of the Murdaugh family's legacy. Investigations into other members of the family, as well as into the law firm that bore their name, uncovered further instances of corruption and misconduct. Lawsuits were filed, assets were seized, and the carefully constructed empire that the Murdaughs had built over generations came crashing down. But the story didn't end there. For Maggie and Paul's surviving family members, the battle for justice was far from over. They turned their attention to advocacy, using their platform to raise awareness about the signs of domestic abuse, financial exploitation, and the dangers of unchecked privilege. "If there's one thing we can take from this tragedy," Marion Proctor said in a public statement, "it's the importance of speaking up. No one should feel trapped, and no one should feel like they have to face these kinds of struggles alone." Alex Murdaugh's case has left a legacy that extends far beyond the courtroom. It's a story of power and privilege gone horribly wrong, a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed, and a tragic reminder of the lives lost when one man's desperation turned to violence. The story of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh will not be forgotten, and their memory will continue to serve as a beacon of hope for those seeking justice and accountability in an often unforgiving world. The conviction of Alex Murdaugh marked the end of one of the most dramatic and shocking trials in recent memory, but the impact of this case continues to ripple far beyond the courtroom. For many, the story of the Murdaugh murders isn't just about a powerful man brought down by his own greed and desperation. It's a reflection of deeper issues in society. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, corruption, and the devastating effects of unchecked power. As the dust settles, people are left asking difficult questions. How did Alex Murdaugh, a man who appeared to have everything, wealth, influence, a loving family, descend into such darkness? Could Maggie and Paul's deaths have been prevented if someone had intervened sooner? And what does this case say about the systems that allowed Alex to operate with impunity for so long? These questions aren't easy to answer, but they're worth exploring. The Murdaugh case has become a symbol of what can happen when privilege goes unchecked, when people in positions of power believe they are untouchable. Alex's financial crimes, his manipulations, and ultimately, his willingness to destroy his own family to save himself, paint a chilling picture of a man consumed by his own hubris. For viewers watching this story unfold, it's hard not to wonder, how many other Alex Murdaughs are out there? How many other individuals are using their influence to manipulate systems, avoid accountability, and harm those around them? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how many of these stories go unnoticed, simply because the people involved don't carry a name as prominent as Murdaugh? Maggie and Paul's deaths were senseless, and the pain felt by their family is immeasurable. But their story has sparked a larger conversation about accountability, about recognizing red flags, and about the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right. This case has shown us that even the most powerful individuals can be held accountable, but only when people are willing to push for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served? Do you believe Alex Murdaugh's life sentence is enough to account for the pain he caused, or should more have been done? And what about the systems that enabled him for so long? Should there be greater scrutiny of families and institutions that hold this kind of power? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions in the comments below. Whether you agree or disagree, your voice matters. This case isn't just about Alex Murdaugh. It's about a system, a culture, and a community that allowed someone like him to operate unchecked for so long. And as you reflect on this story, consider this. What can we do to prevent something like this from happening again? Is it about changing laws, holding powerful people accountable, or educating ourselves and others about the warning signs of toxic behavior? Let us know what you think, because these discussions are how real change begins. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with others who might be interested. And if you want to stay updated on more stories that uncover the darkest corners of human behavior, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll ensure that you never miss an episode, and together, we can continue shining a light on the cases that matter. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deeply it's buried. Let's keep this conversation going, and let's make sure the lessons of the Murdaugh case are never forgotten. See you in the next story.